Welcome to the Alalibo Academy, educating the global learner. Please subscribe and don't forget to hit the notification button to get the next great video. Thank you for tuning in. Today we're looking at the concept of federalism, the Nigerian case. Federalism is a political system of governance and it has been in existence for decades and decades and decades. And it's used all over the world, predominantly used in the United States, which is the flag bearer, so to speak, of this concept, political ideology of federalism. And in the United States, we have a situation where there is a central government. There's a central government, and then the central government is governed by the president. The president is the executive, and then of course you have the state governments who are governed by governors, and then you also have the local tier municipalities where the mayors, typically mayors, are in charge of municipalities. This is federalism. Because they have is one territory, and in this case the territory is the United States, and that same territory is governed by multiple levels of government, in what is known as shared governance, and each of these levels have their primary responsibilities, as in the concept and idea of federalism. They have their primary responsibilities spelled out in the Constitution. Now, the key aspect of federalism is the fact that each of these levels have the power to legislate. Each of these levels have the power to legislate, and they legislate for their respective domain. Now, notwithstanding, there is overriding power in the central government as to just ensure some level of civility. But nevertheless, there is autonomy, and this is key. Autonomy is the defining principle of federalism. The defining principle of federalism is autonomy. So each of these levels of government have autonomy, and that autonomy then allows them to, chart, their own path legislatively, judicially, and also in terms of law enforcement. And that is the case in the United States, and that is the case in other Western countries, such as Canada, where they have a federal government and they have provincial governments that have parliaments, provinces that have parliaments, and then they have, within the provinces, they have cities and municipalities, and each with governing power, etc. Now, the Nigerian case presents a peculiar case and challenges the concept of federalism. Because on one hand, there is a federal government that oversees quite a number of functions. And then you have state governments as well. So federal governments in Nigeria, there's a federal government, excuse me. And then you have state governments. And in the case here, you have 36 states, including federal territory, which is the capital of Abuja. Right? So Federal Capital Territory, the capital of Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, Abuja. And then, of course, you have the local governments. So each of these levels of government govern in the space called Nigeria. Now, that's federalism. That's federalism as per definition, and they have the apparatus of government. So, for example, there is an executive here, which is the president, there's a judiciary, and there is a legislative arm. And same thing applies to each levels of government. Here, in the case of the state, it's governor, and then they have judiciary, and they have legislative as well. And then the local government, they usually have maybe chairperson, and then they have councils, and they have a means of educating conflict. Sometimes they defer to the government, the state government, for that role. But what is lacking in the case of Nigeria is the power of enforcement, the power of law enforcement at the state level, and the power of law enforcement at the local level. And that is because the executive arm of the federal government controls the apparatus of security. The police is a nationalized body and responsive to the central government. And even though the state governor is the chief executive officer of the state, he doesn't have the power, the statutory power to command the police. And we saw this recently in the face of between the Lagos State governor and a senior police officer, chief superintendent of police, whereby the police were occupying an estate in the state of Lagos, and the governor insisted that the police officers must withdraw. But he couldn't enforce that wish. And he requested the senior police officer to call his bosses in Abuja to make that request. And that officer was not able to make that request. Now, this is a very interesting situation where the chief security officer could not and didn't have the power to enforce laws in his own state, within his own border. And so what we have done in Nigeria is federalism on one hand, but then it's not the full-fledged federalism, because the states don't have the power to enforce laws, except the central government commands the police to do so. And that has to be taken into consideration when looking at the totality of federalism and the importance of federalism, and more importantly, the effectiveness of federalism. So for federalism to be effective, there has to be power. There has to be power that is ceded. Power is ceded to the federating units of that space, in this case, Nigeria. And the power that we are talking about here is the power of enforcement. And the chief security officer, if that is their title, it shouldn't be a title without the power to enforce. It should be a title, a meaningful title that goes with the power. So power has to be ceded to the state level so that we have complete federalism. So it's an aberration of federalism to have an aspect of it in terms of autonomy, where the state governments are able to generate revenues and be able to legislate their laws and do other things pertaining to governance, that, however, don't have the power to enforce laws. There is another aspect to federalism as practiced in Nigeria, and that is the process and the idea of what has been known as allocation of resources, allocation from Abuja to the states on a monthly basis. The suggestion here is that the states cannot be self-sufficient and don't have the capacity to be self-sufficient financially, and have to always wait for resources to come from the central government. A major aspect, and we see this in the United States, a major aspect of federalism is for states' fiscal independence. fiscal independence, where states generate their own funds to sponsor and to fund their programs, and to fund their programs. That is a major aspect of federalism, because when we talk about federalism, we talk about independence, autonomy. Autonomy, I want to say independence, not really political independence as sovereignty, but independence in terms of how they manage their affairs. And that includes fiscal independence as well, which is not the case in Nigeria. And so examples have been made of the United States, of Canada, and elsewhere where they practice true federalism, where federalism is practiced. But what has been left out in the discussion is that in the United States, at the very beginning, it was chaotic. There were the breakdown of law and order on certain points and so forth. And this system has been perfected over time. Now, that country is well over 240 years old, well over that. And so they've had time to perfect it. Now, the argument against state police in Nigeria has been multiple arguments, but the prominent ones have been the eminent abuse of power. The eminent abuse of power by state governments, if they have the power of enforcement. If they have the power of enforcement. Now, this may be legitimate concern, but again, nothing good happens until the first step is taken. And that was the case in the US, that was the case in Canada, that was the case in elsewhere around the world where true federalism is practiced. There has to be an initiative, and there has to be a process of maturation where you learn by your mistakes, and you perfect systems, and make sure you put checks and balances in place over time, and it will fall in place. And the same argument was made for democracy in Nigeria, that Nigeria cannot be governed by a democratic government because a democratic government, there it is, democratic government is one of consensus. It's one of consensus, and there cannot be a consensus given the polarization of our society on many fault lines, on ethnicity, polarization on ethnicity, on religion, contentious issue of religion, on many other fronts, and that cannot be on region as well. Region is part of the mix, and many other factors that may contribute to the lack of consensus. But after 20 plus years, we see that there is progress in this area, and at least some meaningful bills have been passed, and some actions have been taken, although a lot more work needs to be done. And so federalism, if it's practiced, has to be practiced wholesomely for the full effect and the full benefits to be realized. Thank you.